All right. So, welcome everybody to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. You'll have to forgive me for pushing it off for an hour this evening. I was somewhat preoccupied doing something that I enjoy, and it's kind of a selfish reason, but I digress. I really greatly appreciate each and every one of you taking the time out of your day to come and join me this evening. We're going to cover a few topics, and I'm going to kind of just softly go over some of these topics. It's not going to be a very long episode this evening, but I think you might find some of this somewhat interesting. Some housekeeping. I think we're still going to be tentatively on track in terms of having my two guests that want to come on to do the bills and legislation episode to help you guys figure out how to go forth and draft bills and legislation, propose them, get them moving with some traction and all of that. I will do the best that I can to try and keep everybody updated on that. But I still don't have a hard set confirmation on that yet, but I am trying. So worst case scenario, I do have a number of different subjects if I have to fill that slot, but we'll get to that point when we get to it. So this evening, I want to talk about a couple core principles, at least in my mind, as they pertain to liberty. And I want to softly touch on some economics and the realm of education, as those subjects go respectively. So before I do that, I want to kind of preface one of the things that kind of drove me on this episode, as it were. I spent basically 5 days this week literally just sitting and listening to audiobooks. I got through like three of Ron Paul's audiobooks, and I have to say they're really good at creating very solid arguments for the case of liberty, and really substantiating a really good perspective and a view of why liberty is important and why we have to basically stay in the fight, why we have to be a part of this fight, and be constructive and active in our efforts, and not just simply it's not just simply enough of wanting to do something. You have to actually get up and do something. So one of the books that I want to kind of give a shout out to was the very first one that I opened up. It was Liberty Defined, the 50 Essential Issues That Affect Our Freedom. It was the first book I got into by Ron Paul. And I have to say, it's probably one of the most, it is going to be a fundamental book in my library from this point forward. He states a lot of really good positions and cases for the defense of liberty, and why liberty is important in a numerous variety of different issues. And so there's a ton in there. I highly recommend that you guys at least check it out, either via audio book or by getting yourself a physical copy. I have myself a physical copy here. It is a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. It's personally where I would start, but you don't have to start there. And then I also went through End the Fed by Ron Paul. And then the last book that I went through was The School Revolution, and they were no less phenomenal than the very first book. So just some things I want to put out there, because I do feel like they're kind of important in how I kind of got to this episode. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. So in some of the subject matter that I had kind of digested this week, there were a couple different themes that were very present in his book that I very much agree with, and that I have to say are something that I've tried to take on myself, and something that I encourage each and every person to do if we're trying to take back liberty and kind of wage this war against authoritarianism and tyranny. And part of that battle begins with personal responsibility and self-governance. These are two very consistent underlying themes that Ron Paul tends to, echo throughout any of the books that I've read. And I think they're very valid points. And I think that they are a fundamental building blocks when it comes to liberty. I don't think, as he had stated, and I very much agree with this myself, I don't think one can have liberty. I don't think a society can have liberty without the realm of self-governance and personal responsibility. These things are absolutely fundamental to liberty, as it were. So what we see is over the years, we start to see this erosion of kind of delegating away these responsibilities that we've had. And I think that this can kind of explain a lot, not only in just the general day-to-day basis, but if we look at our involvement in education, if we look at our involvement in the economy, we've really delegated away our authority and our ability to determine how these things end up. And with that, you also have the realm of self-governance, so I think these two things go hand in hand. When you give away your personal responsibility, you're essentially also giving away your ability to govern yourself. And what's been created with this, what has kind of been the vacuum, is you have the individuals that are elected to these positions. There's not really any control mechanism there anymore, because we're, delegating that out to the very people we are supposed to be checking and balancing. And what you end up getting is this this notion by these elected individuals that, well, they're not capable of being able to govern themselves. They're not capable of being individually or personally responsible. So we have to start adding in regulations. We have to add in safety nets. We have to add in all of these different mechanisms to ensure that they can't fail. And to a degree, I think that kind of brings us, actually to a very large degree, I think that brings us to something like the economy, for instance. Now, the type of economy that we have, and of course, I'm just going to provide a very simplified explanation of this, but as it were, is something called the Keynesian style of economics, or the Keynesian doctrine, Keynesian philosophy. In the end of the day, there's different ways I've heard it, but it comes down to essentially the Keynesian philosophy as to how economy is. And this really became very prevalent when you in and around the time of the Federal Reserve, and it wasn't necessarily always specific with that, but it really got traction with the Federal Reserve. And what you get with this type of economy is you have these safety nets and you have these mechanisms of control, to where you have this inflation and this deflation and the ability to control and make up for it here. And basically you're coddling the economy, really trying to not let it fail. And this is a very, very simplistic way of explaining this, but you're trying to not let it fail, or if it's going to fail, it's going to fail on their terms. Now, this also breeds a lot more control in various sectors, in different industries, and you start getting a lot more of the government in areas that it pretty much should not be in, or otherwise shouldn't be in. And therefore you start to get regulations on small business. You start getting more government involvement in the medical industry, the the mining or agricultural industry. And before you know it, this sense of an actual free market, if you will, or this economy that they like to tout around is like, we have a robust economy. We really don't have a robust economy. As a matter of fact, what it becomes is an economy that is going to eventually buckle under its own weight, because it can't sustain itself. To where if you have a free market economy, what you get is, yes, you're going to have competition. Yes, you're going to have businesses that do fail, but it's in the failure and the ability for the market to determine the success or failure of the businesses, the industries, and ultimately even in so much as the currencies. And having competing currencies, the market is going to recover and do far better in overcoming these obstacles than having more and more and more government regulation. It becomes more insidious, it becomes more authoritarian, and ultimately all you really get is more government in the end of the day, and a less prosperous society as essentially a side effect. It becomes not only just a less prosperous society, but it becomes one that's damaging to every person within that society. Now, I think the economy is very interesting. It's not something that's my first area of study, but I do think it's interesting. And when I was listening to this, to the several books that I had gone through this week with Ron Paul, he had made a lot of very intricate and very specific detail-oriented points as it pertains to the Keynesian philosophy, some of which I'm still trying to get my head around, but it's very interesting how there is this overwhelming need at all levels of government to have to be involved and to act kind of as like the safety net, if you will, and the overwhelming need to have to control, the overwhelming need to consolidate power, which is another big thing, is you have this consolidation of power, which is totally antithetical to liberty, but it's also very antithetical to a prosperous economy. It's a very damaging effect, again. And we can look at things like the money, for instance, where we don't have a sound money. We don't have a money that's really worth much of anything anymore. And because, and on top of that, we also don't have the current ability, as it were, to have competing currencies. A lot of people think that having competing currencies is not going to be a good thing. It's not going to help us at all, but it really does, because if you allow the market to choose, the market is going to go with the thing that's going to be the most robust and the most successful. And then from there on out, it's going to follow a track to where you're going to see prosperity increase. You're going to see that realm of debt decrease. You're going to see more fiscal responsibility, more economic responsibility, but there are always going to be, some hiccups, and there's going to be some moral imperatives, but it's going to be far less, and it's going to be far less detrimental to the average individual, as it were, versus having the type of economy that we have today, again, built on the Keynesian principle. And the Keynesian principle is also something that is overwhelmingly taught in schools, and you're not really going to hear a lot of schools talk about an honest, good free market economy, where you have the competition, you have the ability of people to come in with new ideas. That's the other thing too, is you have to do things in such a way that are either regarded as the right way or are permitted as being the right way. You can't actually go out on a limb necessarily and start to do things the way that you feel they should be done. You have to follow a set of guidelines, where in a free market economy, you really are going to be left to either succeed or fail. And whether your ideas have merit or whether they don't is entirely up to the market. And it's really up to how you are able to put forth those ideals. And so I think there's a lot of turmoil in this economy, but there are a number of things that we can start to do at a lower level, within the community and in the states, that we can start to affect this change. And it's something as simple as being able to, kind of detach ourselves in some way from this economy and start to have our own little microcosms, and the ability to reach out to other people, to have, agreements between them, and to be able to come up with better ideas, better forms of currency, if you will. So we see something like this, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but in things like Bitcoin, we see things like this, and still you still have people that trade in gold and silver, and you have a lot of different options out there. But we just need to get more involved, and we really need to start bringing these types of monies and currencies to the forefront of what it is that we're doing in order to try and take back the economy. Now, I know that that's a lot. Again, I'm not really doing it as much of a justice, but I hope you're kind of getting the general concept of where having a good, sound economy is really reliant on sound money, a free market, and the ability for things to either succeed on their own or to fail completely. We can't be sitting here trying to coddle along and drag along these industries, and more importantly, these large corporations, or any business for that matter, because what it ends up being is it just ends up creating a lot more chaos, a lot more regulation, and a lot more of a need to feel like you have to do something where it's really not merited. So where this comes in, well, first off, thank you, Centerline Systems, for being here. Really appreciate it. Sorry I missed that right away. And Ground Fog, also, absolutely happy to have you. Thank you for stopping in this evening. Now, we might be looking at we might be looking at, like how does this come into the realm necessarily of personal responsibility, self-governance? Well, what we start to see is, and I'm very happy that Centerline Systems brought this up because it is adding into exactly what I was going to say, is you're starting to see states that are getting this realm. You're starting to have individuals within the states that are proposing the not necessarily the legalization, but the acceptance of other forms of currency as it relates to gold and silver certificates. I believe the number of states that are kind of working on that or have worked through it and now have the ability to have a trade network, I think is 7. But I don't want that to be a hard number. I think it was around 7, but I don't remember exactly. But you are starting to see this shift in the states. And so what you're getting is the states are essentially, they're hearing the demand from the people. So you having people that are becoming so much more aware of the issues. They're starting to realize that sound money and proper market values, a good free market system, is going to be the better thing for their states, at least. And so they're listening to this, and then they're making these proposals, and they're trying to set up an additional form of currency that people are able to use in their ability to trade. This is going to also help augment, fiscal responsibility. It's the more and more that we have, it's going to help augment fiscal responsibility, because then people can make better decisions. They can be more aware of what the actual value of something is in terms of what they're spending, the type of currency that they're using. They're going to actually have a better bearing on what it is. They can make better buying decisions. They can make better purchasing decisions. They have more power in what it is that they're able to do. So when it comes down to personal responsibility, we have a responsibility as individuals to really look out and start proposing and get active in these efforts in order to bring back a more sound free market economy approach. And again, the sound money is only but one area. There's a lot of different areas, but I think it's one of the most valuable areas. The ability to freely trade with one another is absolutely fundamental to having a more prosperous and liberty-oriented society. But I think that's going to take a well-educated and a very personally responsible and a very self-governing. So what I mean by self-governing is you have people that are capable of directing, they're capable of taking the reins and being able to direct their lives and direct the things that go on. So you need to have a populace that has responsibility and self-governance to be able to create the outcomes and effects that we desire. So I hope all of that made sense. I know I kind of went a little bit fast on this subject, but I think it's something that is better relegated, at least for me, into trying to keep it as somewhat simple as I possibly can. And you're right, Centerline. It is one of those things to where a number of states are doing it. Unfortunately, the state I live in and the state he lives in is they're not one of them. And I hope that is something that we can change in the coming years. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to require people getting involved and not just necessarily, talking about it, but we have to start getting into like having good fundamental approaches and being able to, put forth bills and legislation to recognize other forms of currency and really start to steer our states into a direction that's going to give way to a good free market, a good sound economy. So we have to get involved. We don't necessarily, like, if we're looking to get a certain result, we're not going to necessarily be able just to sit on the sidelines, albeit as nice as that might be sometimes. We don't really have that choice if we want a desired outcome. And so in all of that being said, I think there is the aspect of education. And I think when we look at education, both as adults and then we look at the education of children, clearly, I think it goes without saying that clearly the public education system has utterly and absolutely failed. We have people that can barely write, they can barely read, they can barely spell their own names. And while there are caveats to people who are fairly intellectually inclined, they're pretty smart people, what you end up getting is a situation in which the people that are a little bit more intellectually inclined in contemporary means, when they go to these higher education institutes, what ends up happening is they either are kind of like their potential is either squashed or they're kind of coaxed into this realm to where they're allowed only so much movement to the point to where they can't fully actually use all the potential that they need. And I was talking about self-governance and personal responsibility just briefly a little while ago. And those are individuals that have the ability or have already gained the ability to be very self-governing. They know the direction they want to go. They know the things that they want to achieve. And when you have a system that doesn't really allow that person to be able to put their nose to the grindstone in a way that is befitting of their abilities, then you're neutering overall that student's ability to get the most out of their education, but also to maximize their own abilities in determining their future. No one can be splashed in black mark. And that's, and just to briefly go back, Chuck, hey, great to have you. I really appreciate you stopping in. Thank you for coming in and supporting the show. Would absolutely love to hear some of your opinions as we go on here, as well as anybody else. And then Centerline, you bring up a really good point pertaining to the economy that I'd like to go back on just real quick. If we do not, then no one can be surprised when black market economies start springing up. I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, again, if there's not a free market system that is going to be in place, people are going to find a way. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We are going to find a way. There's always, we've seen this in the prevalence, especially in some of the most tyrannical and authoritarian governments. There is always underground movements. There is always a means and a way to get certain things. People will find a way. And, to some degree, I mean, in the end of the day, for good, bad, or indifferent, I mean, that's where you start to get that spark of that free market, because people are going to trade and they're going to do the things that they need to do, despite the government saying whether they can or can't, or even despite the government being involved at all. So, and then he goes on to say the Department of Education was created and we went from something like 4th in the world, don't quote me, to 40th or 44th. And the Department of Education in and of itself is unconstitutional. It's not even supposed to exist. You're not even supposed to have the government involved in the broader sense of education. And at the maximum, it should have been something left up to the states. But I like Ron Paul's perspective, rather, that a good sense of schooling should be down even further to the community level, to where you have a more focused approach, a better approach when it comes to the way that kids are taught, the way that kids are allowed to expand their abilities to go forth and to determine the pathway that they're able to learn in, to really drive their own future, instead of sitting them down in front of, lectures and 7 hours a day, going through information in a situation in which the teachers are predominantly going to focus, and it's nothing against this individual, but they're predominantly going to focus a majority of their efforts on the lowest common denominator to try and make sure that they keep up with the class. And as a result, you're going to have people that are already way ahead of the class that really can't move forward, because they have to stay with the class. They have to, stay within the curriculum. And what it creates is, it really creates this situation to where the person who's behind isn't really getting that good of an education for a variety of different reasons, but not limited to the fact that they're constantly being paid attention to. And it's not to say that people can't get help, but what you start to create is a sense of coddling. So instead of helping them in a proper way to where they can actually expand their ability to properly learn a subject or a particular position, as it were, what you're creating now is a safety net that they're going to end up going along with, and they're not going to be able to adequately function down the road. And you can still get this situation where you can have this with even very highly intellectual students, if you have highly intellectual students that are not really given the ability to take the reins of their own education and direct it in a way that they see fit to some degree, then what you're starting to get is you will eventually end up with a situation where it becomes kind of like a coddling mechanism, to where they get so used to having somebody there telling them exactly what they're supposed to do that they're not going to really be able to go into a college or a university without having that type of assistance. And so you're holding people back to some degree, where the people that have a better grasp on the subject matters aren't able to really move forward. And then you're having the other spectrum where they're getting so much attention paid to them that they're not going to realize how to function beyond having somebody there all the time. And then you have everybody in the middle, and it becomes this massive mess. And then I think one of the most telling portions of education is we have this situation to where they're really trying to negate school choice. And when I was listening to the audio, one of the audiobooks from Ron Paul, and it was in the School Revolution, he had mentioned that, in the end of the day, like there's almost like this revulsion to homeschooling by the public school sector. And what you're starting to find, and what he was finding in his book, is actually children that were homeschooled oftentimes were able to test out and have a much higher intellectual capability than people that were going to public schools. And he had talked about this at length. And a big reason for that is because what you get in something like homeschooling, and you can get this also in private schooling, depending on how the curriculum is set up, is a situation where they really allow the students after a certain age or after a certain grade to really be able to drive their curriculum. They take the training wheels off. They allow them to self-teach them, or be able to get into self-teach mode, to where they are capable of being able to go forth and to learn subjects as they need to in the way that they're capable of doing. And what you're finding is there's a lot higher retention, not only of the subject matter, but you're starting to see a growth in the overall intellectual capability. Whereas you don't have necessarily that freedom when it comes to students in a public school setting. There's a very hard line curriculum. You also have the situation where the schools are subsidized by the government, and ultimately the government determines what the curriculum is, albeit some people might say, well, they can't technically do that. They do it with subsidies, and they basically dangle that carrot in front of the schools, and most of the schools are going to, go into they're going to take the money that the government puts out there, and then they're at the behest of whatever the curriculum is that they deem fit. And I do like what you're saying here, Centerline. Also, it is really a critical thinking skill situation, where it does just become memorization. You're in this situation to where it's like, you need to memorize this, you need to memorize that. But even in saying that, the things that in most of the public curriculums, they're not even worthwhile of memorization. And you do start to get a lot of children that get to a point to where they just get bored. They get very disinterested, because what they're finding is, I don't really have an interest. It doesn't matter to me. It's not relevant to what it is I want to do. And Ron Paul had actually made a pretty interesting point that I had never heard of, but he said that most children, at least from what it is that he had gathered, most children by the time of 6th grade were capable of being able to start to have some autonomy in terms of their education, and being able to direct where they wanted their education to go, in conjunction with the ability to learn better and being able to grasp concepts in a far better way if they have a little bit more freedom and a little bit more leeway in being able to learn. And so I think that was a very interesting thing. And that's where you start to get these concepts in education of self-responsibility or personal responsibility and self-governance. You're creating a situation in which the younger generation, these younger kids, these students, are being kind of slowly pushed towards you're getting a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more responsibility, and the self-governance aspect of being able to stay disciplined and being capable of making decisions, being capable of being able to effectively communicate, effectively be able to do a bunch of other things, and effectively be able to get through the coursework that they're presented with. And I think when we start to look at this in a liberty sense, what you're starting to do is you're already starting to instill the main core components of liberty to or in the students, as it were. And I think when you can do that, even if they do go to a larger university, they're going to have a different perspective, and they're going to have a more robust bulwark to a lot of the ridiculous stuff that they're teaching in universities, and they'll be able to go be successful without becoming derailed by the curriculums or a bunch of the ridiculous points or talking points that are purported in or prescribed in most of your larger universities or academies. So I think when you look at the realm of liberty, there's an underlying theme, whether it's education, whether it's economy, whether it's just general day-to-day life, that there needs to be a sense of personal responsibility and the ability to self-govern. Now, this is something that I do think can spread. And I think that these ideas and these notions and in these principles very much so have the ability to spread. But we as individuals have to be so much more concerned with where are we at? Where are we being involved? Where are we involving ourselves, rather? And how effective are we in all of the things that we're doing right now? Are we doing something to affect the change down the road? Are we getting involved in the things that matter? Are we putting our feet to the ground? And are we taking our ideas, our principles, and our morals into the sector of competition and being able to make a good, robust argument for liberty? And I think when we ask ourselves that question, we need to also look at how much are we willing to learn? What is it that we are willing to learn? Are we even open to the idea of learning? And are we capable of admitting the things that we don't do right? I said in the very beginning, I'm not an economist. It's not my first area of study. It's not my most intellectual pursuit. And nor is, in many ways, the area of education. But there are a lot of ideas that I do agree with, that are sound ideas, they're sound principles that really support liberty. They support the means to an end, if you will, of getting a prosperous, more liberty-oriented society. And a lot of the conversations that were had in the books that I had read is again, the underlying theme of what are we doing? Are we self-governant? Can we become self-governant as individuals? And do we have the personal responsibility it takes in order to achieve the things that we want to achieve? So Snowshoe Dave, really appreciate you stopping in, sir. Thank you very much for coming in. Again, everybody who's stopped in, I greatly appreciate all of the support. Thank you so much. And I really do hope that you enjoy the things that we are doing here on Sentinels of Liberty. And if you have topic suggestions also, please don't hesitate to throw them down, and I will do the best that I can to try and cover those in a reasonable manner, if it's enough within my wheelhouse to where I feel like I can talk about certain things. And if not, I will try and find a person who is a little bit more versed in that, and I will bring them on and we will try and have a discussion that way, because I can learn still, and as well as I'm sure anybody else can. So again, the core fundamental areas that I was talking about this evening, and again, it's not going to be a super long video, but are the realm of personal responsibility, self-governance. And I keep repeating these because they're very important. It's if we don't have these things, we're never going to be able to make the difference that we seek, the difference that we want. And I do really feel that we have to start going after things like the education system and like the economy in order to really start to gain a foothold into getting the outcomes that we want. And I know that those are two massive behemoths, but I think that they are also local enough to the point to where we can make those difference at a local level. It's just going to take some time and effort. And what I would encourage people is, you don't have to go right to Ron Paul. You don't have to read his books right away or at all if you don't want to. But I would highly recommend Ron Paul's literature. I think he does a really good job of explaining in much greater detail a lot of these principles, a lot of these points, a lot of these philosophies as it pertains to liberty. But also look at people like Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, F.A. Hayek, and so many other people. They have really, really well thought out philosophies, points of view, perspectives on things like the economy, on things like liberty, on things like creating a much more prosperous society. And ultimately, I think the more that we can educate ourselves on these different perspectives, the better we have to bring to bear the weapons that we can use, so to speak, quote unquote, of education in order to be more effective in our actions. I don't think that we can have good actions if we don't have the proper education to carry forth those actions. So, and again, I'm a huge proponent of the community level, and at the highest right now, the state level. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think that these are areas that we really can start to make inroads on. And I think it's going to just require people getting a little bit more involved and not being afraid to educate themselves in the ways that are going to help them essentially be able to make the arguments that they need to make to create that bulwark. And together, I think we can do that. So I certainly put myself in that category. I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to improve things. I'll be completely honest with you. I'm probably going to go back and read this book in particular, probably a half a dozen times or more. There's so many concepts in that particular book that I would be remiss to say that I understood everything the first time. I don't think that one can necessarily say that you're going to understand everything the first time you read through it. Topic suggestion: why you should not buy an AK platform. Well, you know what? I may have to do a special video on that perhaps down the road, because as Centerline Systems knows, I kind of have a love relationship with the AK platform. I like the AR platform. I like all guns, actually. As a proper American, I like anything that goes boom, boom, bang, bang. But he likes to pick on me a little bit, and I think it's great. We have really good banter. But you know what? For you, I may just pull that one out. So I'm going to put that one in my hip pocket, and maybe I can try and fit that in, in maybe in the next couple of weekends. We'll see what happens. But maybe I can pick on you a little bit too. So, but again, this was going to be a little bit shorter. I hope that there was something that you guys were able to kind of get from this video. It wasn't something that I wanted to expound upon a lot, but I wanted to bring about some different principles, some different things that I felt were very important in some different areas that hopefully you guys might be a little bit interested in looking into. I would definitely say, if I was to point people in a direction, definitely read up on economics, the free market economics, and also looking into the realm of education. Again, if you really want to get more involved into, for those of you who have children, if you really want to start getting more involved into the education aspect, I highly, highly recommend, even though it's an older book, highly recommend The School Revolution by Ron Paul. There may be a few other authors that touch on this, but what I found, at least in my reading so far, is he has a very, very well fleshed out book and a method of being able to create the change that we need in the education system. And again, I would also say that the End the Fed is great. and then liberty defined is also another really good jumping off point for getting involved in economics and getting involved in a lot of different issues that maybe you might have an interest in. So I hope I was able to bring some of some of that to light this evening, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of push people to some degree, not crazy, but maybe push people a little bit closer to opening up their perspectives and their ideas so that maybe we can start to get some more people on the side of liberty. And I just want to look back at the comments here real quick. Centerline Systems says, backfired on me. Well, I don't know. I think there may be a discussion that is yet to be had. And you know what? I kind of welcome that. Maybe that's a discussion I might have to bring you and one or two other people on, and maybe we could just have a fun little Liberty roundtable talking about a variety of different subjects. So we'll see where we want to go with that. Snowshoe Dave, AR-10. I had one. I actually really liked it. I had an AR-10 before I even had like a 5.56 AR. So I'm kind of biased. I like, I kind of like the bigger rounds, the 30 cal rounds. That's just me. I don't know. They're fun. So to each their own. In the end of the day, I would say shoot whatever it is you want to shoot. Get out. As long as you're getting out there, you're having fun, you're learning something. That's another big fundamental thing. You're learning something, and you're going out to the range with some intent and the willingness to learn, but also having a little bit of fun. Then absolutely do whatever you want to do. Get the platform that best suits you, that's the most effective, because we're not all the same. And have fun with it. So I greatly appreciate everybody for stopping by. Again, if there's something more that you want to add, please feel free to add some stuff down in the comments. Even when the live is done, I would still love to hopefully carry on some conversations in the comments. I think there's still a lot that we can learn from each other, and still the ability to have reasonable discourse and the exploration of ideas. And I don't think that conversation ends even after the live or even after a video is posted. So please, if there's something that you think about, whether it's on this particular live afterwards or whether it's after one of the other lives, please throw it in the comment section. And I will do the very best that I can to respond to that. Or, again, if it's topic suggestions, I will do my best to take a look at those comments as well. And hopefully we can try and continue to drive this forward and really make the most out of this experience as we possibly can. So with that being said, thank you again. I know this was a little bit shorter. I really appreciate all of you here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all of the comments, all of the suggestions that you guys may make. And I will see you all next Saturday, hopefully at 1700 Central Daylight Time, if I'm not out selfishly having too much fun at the range with a buddy of mine. Hopefully at 1700 I will do, and I will also try to do far better in having updates sooner and earlier in the week. I have not been very good, so let's check that box. And the personal responsibility and self-governance, not quite optimal on my part. So I am going to try and do a lot better for you guys. So I hope you guys have a fantastic evening, and I will see you next Saturday, 1700 Central Daylight Time. Thank you again for joining the Sentinels of Liberty stream tonight, and I look forward to seeing you all on the next one.